Quick note before we get started. Coming up real soon, we're going to be recording a manufacturer's roundtable with Jameson Hahn from Grizzly Industrial. And we want to know what you, the listeners of Shop Talk Live, want to ask Grizzly. It might be what products they foresee coming out with or changing, or how they go about designing their machines. Anything you've wanted to get an insider perspective on in the world of making and selling machines, send them in to shoptalk@taunton.com and we'll ask Jameson. And I think it'll be a cool opportunity to learn a little bit more about a different aspect of the industry. Welcome to Shop Talk Live, big time episode 250. We've got something really fun in store. I'm really excited to bring this episode to you. It was a little surreal for me talking to the one and only Ed Pirnik about the early days of Shop Talk Live and how things got started and what he's been up to and what it was like. Super stoked about that. But first, here's Mike telling us about his new book and his new online class, Foundations of Woodworking. So Mike, tell the audience about, well, first off, what they can expect to find in your new book that's different from the first, and about the new course, the online course that you're doing.
Yeah, so the book is basically, I guess the easiest way to describe it is, if my first book hopefully inspired you to get out in the shop and want to make something, then with the second book in hand, I want you to have the confidence that you can go out in the shop and actually make what you want to make. So Foundations of Woodworking. It's not beginning woodworking. It's not the basics of woodworking. I thought Foundation was a good name because it's basically covering the foundational skills, basic joinery, that everything else is based on. And so it starts with joinery, but then it really gets into how are you combining simple joints in a really powerful, versatile way to make what you want. And then finally, once you know what your skeleton is, you know how things are going to come together, how do you actually go about making it in a way that is really efficient and makes your life easier? Yeah.
So, I think one thing that I've noticed in the book is it's the foundations and not just do this joint, do this joint, do this joint. It's why you're doing this joint. And if you are coming up with a design, how you can transfer this knowledge to anything you're building, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So what about the course, the online course?
So the course, not coincidentally, is titled Foundations of Woodworking. It really parallels the book. It's a cool product, I hope, in that writing a book, that's a really fulfilling thing to do. Teaching a week-long class is great as well. When you're teaching a class, you're not covering every single option for doing everything. Usually it's like, we're making this, the next thing we need to do is this, and this is why we have to do it, but let's go. And a lot of the information in Foundations is buried in something like that. And in a book, you can read it, and hopefully you can read it and get what you want. But the Foundations course, it's a 6-week course. Each week is dedicated to a specific subject matter. And within that, there's a number of lessons, I think 7 to 9 lessons, which each have their own video content and PDF handouts as well. And the idea is that we really get to the heart of building in a way that isn't consumed by what we're actually making, although there are projects, but the projects are a means to make sense of everything and show how things can work in conjunction. So I think the pacing is going to be a lot different. It's going to be a lot different than a multi-week video workshop, which is, purely video and step-by-step. I think I was just thinking about it today, and in my mind, I think even though it's taking place over 6 weeks. I think this is like a full semester woodworking course, the way I think about it. And like you come in with basic understanding of woodworking, and you leave hopefully better to go out and make whatever you want to make. Yeah, that's my hope.
Well, and it's kind of, it makes sense. It kind of is like a college course where it's kind of lecture and demonstrations and then put it in practice.
Right.
So you like we spent some time yesterday filming one of the first milestones or set of lessons, and then the next one is bringing all of those pieces into practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you really did set it up in a way where it's theory, woodworking theory, followed by practice. So it's very, very cool so far.
Yeah. So we filmed an episode on rabbits, grooves, and dados. I have a cat who just sat on my keyboard.
What else is new?
Yes. So we did, the first milestone is rabbits, grooves, and dados, which is, that's really interesting. Okay, this is going to take like 5 minutes, but even something like that, it's depending on the situation, the size of the stock, the challenge you're faced with. There's a lot of ways to go about all of those joints. Is it a through joint? Is it stopped? Is it a stop joint on a big panel or a small piece? All of those things, dictate a different way to go about it. So we covered everything from table saw work, dado blades, L fences, handheld routers, plunge routers, router tables with different bits, hand work to pick up where the machines leave off. And basically, you're now hopefully well armed with some solid foundational joinery making skills. And it's like, okay, this is good. And then next week that we're going to be filming is let's put those joints together, because a rabbit, dado, and groove are really simple on their own, but really powerful in combination. Yeah. And so we're going to do a really cool wall cabinet project, which really puts all those into use and drives that home. And we get to do some fun woodworking. And then the rest of the course is going to progress along that. We'll cover mortise and tenons, dovetails, and miters. And hopefully, that's going to pack your suitcase and you can go wherever you want to go from there.
Yeah. And really with those subjects covered as in depth as we're going right now, you can take this information and just apply it and build anything after that. Because everything is made of mortise and tenons, rabbets, grooves, dados, dovetails, miters. That's about it, really. So
yes, yeah.
So, so if anyone's interested, head on over to foundationsofwoodworking.com. I believe there is a early bird sign up session going until the end of the month. So there's a few days after this episode it will come out. And we're excited for everyone. Oh, we didn't talk about the Q&A.
Oh, yeah. So
that's like the most important part to me.
Yes. I think it's going to be one of my favorite parts is that every week or after each milestone, we're going to have a live Q&A session where we can address, whatever questions you have that came up the week prior as you're trying to put things to use. I think that's really cool. I'm excited by that. So it's going to be a live session, hopefully with some really useful answers to your very valid questions that are going to come up. And then that will also be archived as part of the course as well. So even though it's going to be released week to week, once it's released, once we do a Q&A session, that's going to be up for grabs for whenever you want to go back and reference that.
Right on. So foundationsofwoodworking.com.
Yep. And book is available for pre-sale. It's not, it's definitely a companion piece, but they're not interrelated. Goes on sale October 26th. You can pre-order from the Taunton store, from Amazon. I've got some signed books on my website you can pre-order. Those are going pretty quick, mainly because I really don't want to mail out more books than I have to. But but
that got a little out of hand last time.
yeah. So, but I'm super excited to get that out as well.
Cool. All right. Well, on with the episode with Ed.
Welcome to Shop Talk Live, Fine Woodworking's biweekly podcast. I'm former senior web producer Ed Pirnik, and joining me today is the host, Ben Strano. There you go. Yeah, I can still do it.
Yeah, I can't remember my job title either. So it's
digital brand manager.
True. I don't know what that means, but Ed, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This is a little like I think we ran into each other one time at Matt Kenny's housewarming party. What, 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago?
Yeah, it's about that. Yep.
Yeah.
I still make it up there to drink scotch from time to time.
Oh, good. And burn scrap wood on the porch, I assume.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah. Last time I was there was to buy a machine that he doesn't use, which is right behind me. But yeah. So, what have you been up to?
So, I wound up at a financial institution, and I'll leave it at that. People can figure out where I went on LinkedIn, since they have PR people to talk about all that stuff. But I wound up producing media at a financial institution, and I sort of built a new shop. I took over our garage. We actually moved. I took over our garage again, built it into a shop. And so I'm still building all sorts of stuff. Not just furniture. There might be a device used for making Scotch whiskey involved in there somewhere. Maybe. I'm using it to distill water.
Yes, distill water. Yes.
Yeah.
So I listen to, as a fan, I listen to every episode of Shop Talk Live hosted by you.
Yeah.
And thinking back, I'm almost positive the entirety of your tenure on Shop Talk Live, you were continuously building out a new shop. It's like you would just about get it done and then move, right?
Well, so I'm trying to think, when we started the podcast, when it was still a complete train wreck, we were in our first home, and it was a 1900. It was built in 1900, and it was on the cusp of the arts and crafts period. So it wasn't quite arts and crafts, but you could see what was going to become that movement. And it had this really weird basement. You went down, and there used to be like some engineer lived there. And so it had all these cabinets built in on the walls, which was great. It had a big island that I took out to make room for the table saw. And then it had a gas line for, remember in high school, the gas line with the little cock to open and close the thing for the Bunsen burner. It had one of those, and I actually opened it. I was like, oh, well, that smells like gas. Well, that's still working. But it was a cool space because it had all that cabinetry, and it worked for a while. And I put 220 in for the table saw. It had a Bilco door, so you could get lumber in and out really easily. It was great. And then we moved. Maybe it was, I'm trying to think. That was the shop that I was in for the entirety of the time. Yeah, that I was at Fine Woodworking. And then I moved about 2 years after I left Fine Woodworking. Now I'm in my new house, and that's where I have my garage shop. But my shop now is largely, it's good. I don't need to really do anything to it except clean it, which I don't do.
That's never ending. Do you still have your not so big workbench?
I do, and it's I'll have to send a photograph around because it's definitely well loved and stained with glue and stain and all sorts of stuff. And truth be told, I still love it. I mean, I wouldn't mind a larger workbench. Sometimes that's useful, but it's a decent size, especially for my space. It's like a small one-car garage from the late 40s. So, not a ton of real estate. Yeah. But I still get a lot of use out of it.
But so I would assume you were behind the camera for this, and I always wanted to ask you about just over the past few months, we've been talking and asking people about their favorite Phil Lowe story. And I would assume that you were behind the camera for Phil Lowe's workbench.
Yeah, totally.
Did you know that shot was coming at the end with the hammer?
Yes. Yes.
Where Phil just whacks it with a hammer. This brand new workbench.
Did. Okay. We kind of joked about. There was another hammer whacking that was off camera before we shot that, and he's like, "Oh, this is how you christen a workbench." And I was like, "Oh, let's do that again." So Phil. So first of all, actually, I have. This is my original Furniture Institute of Massachusetts FIM mug, which has completely faded away.
Wow.
But I still use it every day. And I have a backup one that I only use once in a while now that Phil is no longer with us because I don't want it to disappear. Yeah. But Phil was a guy, dare I say, near and dear to my heart. I really liked him a lot. And his buddy, Artie. I recall fondly going out sailing with Phil. He enjoyed taking folks out on his boat, and that was always a blast. And he used to have, there were a lot of Philisms, terms that he had and phrases that he had. And one of them that I always loved was for, somebody really, really dumb. When the light bulb finally goes off on whatever sort of topic that he was discussing with them, he'd kind of look at him and he'd say like, it's like dawn of a marblehead, which to translate for those of you who are not from New England, it's like dawn over Marblehead, which is an area of Massachusetts where really rich people live. But it has really nice dawns, I guess, it's like dawn over Marblehead. And I don't know, he was just full of stories, and he made everything look very easy. He really and truly did. So I was like all you guys, I was completely shocked and blown away when I heard that news.
Well, I remember walking down the street, walking my dog and listening to the show, and it was very obvious that you had a woodworking crush on Phil Lowe. Like you learned a lot from that man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from everybody. I mean, Phil, I learned a lot of tricks for just involving just basic things like, how to mark the cheeks, for a tenon on a piece of wood. He had certain tricks that would ensure that when you use the square and the marking knife, that all four lines would come together perfectly. And it had to do with the joining faces on a corner that you always index the square against. But it was stuff like that you would see him do it. You go, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
So, and he was always pulling those out of a bag, basically. And that's the kind of thing that only comes with time. And then you'd have guys like, Garrett Hack, who would, Garrett would, he would do things seemingly like freehand and off the cuff and like zing, zang, zoom. And it was like, all right, I've got this fantastic inlaid leg. And like, I did everything against the rules. He broke every single rule possible. And incidentally, my daughter, my wife went into labor during my first video shoot with Garrett.
Oh.
So I was up there for it was like the second day, and my daughter arrived like 2 weeks early. So this was like my last little bit of travel. And like 3:00 in the morning, I got that call, and it was like, I knocked on the producer's door next door in the hotel. I was like, well, see you later. And that was that.
Who was producing at the time?
It was a guy named John Ross who he's way before your time, but he used to work, he used to do production for both woodworking and home building.
Okay.
And he's now on the West Coast.
Was Gary there?
Gary was not on that trip. Gary, I believe, was doing the editing on that series.
Okay.
So I went up with John.
Gary Junkin's a legendary cameraman, videographer, editor around Taunton. And I always imagine it was always because these days it's usually me and Jeff Rose in a car and we're running a little tighter than I think it was back in the day. And I always imagine it was you and Gary just driving through the countryside. Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah.
It was usually Gary and I would go out like, a couple of boyfriends looking at antique furniture, when we were on our way to dinner. It was like I was dating a much older man, and we'd walk by these like antique stores
with much
like,
more energy than you could possibly have, though. So
yes. it was like, oh, that's a beautiful cabriolet, Gary. I really, it's stunning. And then we go out and proceed to have too much bourbon, usually.
Yeah. So you got to, I almost said you got to study under, because you are, when we're shooting these woodworkers, it's like taking a class with them. So you worked with Phil and Garrett and Tim Rousseau, I assume.
Yeah, Tim Rousseau. Yep.
Who
Mr.
else?
Anal Retentive. Tim has got the cleanest shop, and like everything is in its place and like prim and proper and beautiful. And it just drives me insane because I wish I could treat my shop and my projects in that manner. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like, so anybody that works at that magazine, it is very much, as you say, it is very much a crash course in how to build furniture. Like I had an innate ability since I was a kid to build things. And so when I took that job, that was like an absolute dream come true. And it was a very steep learning curve. And they basically just threw me in the fire, Yeah. And I eventually figured it out. But like there was a lot of experimentation when I was at Taunton. Like, there was, I could just come up with ideas and just experiment. And, the podcast was one of them. I mean, it started out, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I mean, I was like putting lav mics on people to mic them. And like, it was, and we were doing it in the shop, which obviously is loud, and there's HVAC echoes, noise. Yeah. It was terrible. But like we would loop, and we would figure out like, well, that didn't work, so let's try this. And no, that worked better, but not quite. Let's try this. And we just keep iterating. It's life.
Whoa, hang on.
Yeah.
Because Shop Talk Live, and I've always had like a tinge of guilt in the fact that I thought I was the one who started like snipping things out and making it a little less live. Are you telling me that it's never been live?
It was live. Maybe the first, I don't remember, maybe 5 or 6 episodes when it was like Mike and Asa in the shop with horrible sound.
And you were off camera.
I was off camera, and it was, that was live because we would live stream it. And that was in the days when live streaming was very new. Yeah. And it was a real pain in the ass to do. Yep. And like there was lag that we had to deal with. And it was like I said, it was a train wreck. But it was a fun experiment. But yeah, so the first few episodes actually were completely and utterly live. So yeah.
I think I actually found when we were cleaning out that shop, I found it was like an MDF desk that you obviously had everything mounted to, and there was in pencil written on there like, plug this into this, log into this. And I remember I came across them going, what is this? And I'm trying to figure it out. And I was like, wait a minute, this was actually live at one time. So you were live streaming it back in 2012.
Yeah, I built the world's first live stream desk, switching desk. So it was live. So there's like a mixer in there, and there was some computer that hooked up to the live stream site and all this nonsense. And then we kind of slowly but surely kind of picked it up a bit. But the interesting thing for people who are listening to this is the fact that building that we were in originally, you obviously know this, Ben, but that building that we were originally in is now the police station in Newtown, Connecticut.
Yep.
So have you shop by is like lately? A jail. Yeah. I think the shop is the jail. That's literally the holding cells, but yes, I have driven by longingly.
When you started just turning it into a podcast proper, you would edit and then you had like a little room off to the side in one of the offices, right?
So the podcast was done, and then eventually we brought video back into it, and Jeff Roos would put 3 cameras in a room. Not so different than the way I imagine you're doing it now, but it was the room that we used to have our Yellow Jacket meetings.
YJs, yep.
YJs, where we would decide on which submissions we wish to turn into articles. It was in that room, so I would literally like take out the table they had in there normally. I'd roll in this round table, set all the mics up and all this stuff. It wasn't a dedicated room per se. But it it worked fairly well. And actually before that was when we moved buildings. But when we were still in the original building that is now the police station, we did have a dedicated room. And I went out and got, sound absorbing foam for the walls and all this sort of stuff. That was a pretty cool room. So, I kind of turned into a carpenter for a while there I'm supposed to be editing stuff, and I was like nailing foam on walls and, building all sorts of baffles and stuff. Shop Talk Live has evolved considerably in the past almost 10 years now is what I'm realizing. It's almost 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I realized that until you had mentioned it in the email, and I went back and 2012, what is it? March of 2012, I believe. But, it's hard to believe that, a podcast can continue on that long, but, you started something pretty cool. And what was the brainstorming like? Was it you and Asa?
Let me go back. It was, in the beginning, certainly it was Asa, it was me and Asa. And then, as things evolved, because Asa eventually moved to the West Coast, so he was off the show. And then it was, Mike and Matt and I, but basically the way it would work, let's go to the Mike, Matt, and Ed period. It was basically that, we had that email address. People would send stuff in. I would go over everything that came in, and I'd pick, a bunch of questions. And then the three of us would sit down that morning and go through them and decide which were the final ones. And we would also, sit there and decide on things like all-time favorite tool of all time, all those ridiculous little segments.
Yeah.
So there would be like, a 45-minute meeting in the morning, and then we would just sit down and I would set up the little studio room, and that was it, take it away. But there wasn't a ton of pre-production,
But originally, like, whose idea was the podcast?
That was me.
Yeah. Oh, really? Okay.
So like I said, they gave me as the web producer it was cool. It was a cool job because they gave me sort of carte blanche to come up with ideas, and then, I could present any wacky idea. And I'm trying to think of there were definitely podcasts that I was listening to at the time that got me interested in the idea. And incidentally, I've never admitted this to anyone, but
It's just you and me, Ed.
Just you and me. So I don't mind saying this, but the inflection in my voice when I would do the intro was a direct ripoff of Kai Ryssdal doing the intro to Marketplace.
Oh, it makes sense. It makes total sense.
Like there's a certain inflection. I was like, God, that guy, I love that guy's voice. And so, Kai Ryssdal would always say, like, it's September 15th, 2021. This is Marketplace, And I was like, sounds so cool. I want to sound like him. And what a name, Kai Ryssdal. What is that?
You can't follow that. You can't follow that or beat that. So it's when I started doing it, I had a hard time not doing the Pirnik.
Yeah.
And
the Ryssdal.
And I think I actually changed the script because I would just automatically fall into the same
Totally.
thing.
Well, it's like when you write music and if you do a cover, you inevitably imitate the voice of the person who originally did it. It's hard to,
absolutely.
So you change, so that's what, right? I guess that's what you do. You change it up, and now it's your voice.
So you came up with this wacky idea for a woodworking podcast, which still doesn't really make that much sense. 250 episodes in, but a woodworking podcast, and they just said, yeah, sure, let's try it.
Yeah, at that time we had a publisher named Anatole Birkin. Mm-hmm. Anatole was an old hand from the magazine, and I got along really well with him. And I think I had mentioned it to him, and he was all in. And then, we talked to Asa, because Asa was the editor of the magazine at that time. Asa was totally into it. And I'm trying to remember if Mike I want to say Mike had a bit of trepidation appearing on the podcast initially.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Like Mike's not the most gregarious guy. He's a little bit quieter, you know, but he was like, I've always felt, I still feel like he's a natural because he's kind of like this wise sage.
Well, and it's, as with anything else he does, it's a skill he's honed over time. But I don't think it's his natural inclination to put himself out there like that. But
he's honed it. It's a skill he's honed. That's good then.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Woodworking.
First he ground it. He ground it first and then he honed it. Yeah, that was absolutely my favorite thing to do at the magazine.
Yeah.
No contest. Best thing.
Yeah, you could tell for anyone who hasn't gone back that far, you have to listen to your farewell. It really was emotional for you, and I remember feeling emotional about it. And it was shortly after Ace's kind of sign off from the program too. Yeah. And I remember quickly thinking like, oh no, what is gonna happen? And then and then here we are. But and everybody's worst nightmares has come true. But so that must have been really difficult though, because this was your baby. You birthed it and you raised it. So
it was very difficult. I think this is nothing, earth shattering, but like anytime you work someplace for a long time, you develop very strong friendships. And so when I left, I was pretty depressed for a good 2 or 3 months when I left Fine Woodworking because, I moved to a different place and like all my buddies were gone.
Yeah.
And so about, I want to say like 6 months to a year after I left, I was at a lumber yard a couple towns over from where I live. And I was looking for some species of wood or something. And I was asking some guy in the yard and some other guy who was working in the lumber yard goes, are you Ed? And I kind of got creeped. I got a little creeped out,
Yeah.
And this happened twice it happened. And it was some guy listened to the podcast. And like, that was kind of like sticking a knife and turning it. He's like, oh man, I really missed that. It was so fun. So that happened a couple times. And I came home and told my wife, I was like, oh, you won't believe it. She's like, oh, you're such a fat head. Like, get over yourself. It's like, no, it was really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm sure you've gotten the, cause I remember having the distinct, realization too. It was like, wow, Ed Pirnik sounds just like Ed Pirnik. Yeah. Have you ever gotten that comment? Because every now and then someone will say, you sound just like you. And it's like, well, I don't know how that's supposed to be otherwise, but okay.
And then when you listen to yourself, you're just like, ugh, it's horrendous. I can't stand hearing myself.
Yeah. So what, as the show evolved, what was surprising to you about it?
Well, definitely, I don't mean to put Mike on the spot, but Mike's evolution, definitely surprised me because I knew, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. Like it sounds pompous to say like, well, I knew that, but in all honesty, I knew that I really wanted Mike on the podcast because he just, Mike is a very capable and very talented teacher. Mm-hmm. He's very patient and he has a knack for explaining things clearly and concisely. Whereas I tend to have a lot of verbal diarrhea. And so and those of us in the office did look at him like a bit of a wise sage. Mm-hmm. So I knew, I wanted him, but I didn't know. I was like, I don't know. Is Mike going to speak? Cause he's a little quiet and I don't mean that as a negative. It just, Mike's a little bit quieter than I am. The other thing that got amusing was the relationship that developed between the three of us. And that was something that was very organic and unplanned. So the way it ended up working out, and it was kind of true to life. You had Mike was the wise sage, very patient. You had Matt, who was also very talented, but very snarky. And so there was chemistry there. And then I kind of came in like, I had a good amount of ability, but I was still the youngest of the three and the least experienced by far. And so it worked for me as in the host seat to be asking all those questions, right? Yeah. So that whole thing, you had the guy who wants to learn a lot, you have the smart ass, and you have the wise, slightly older sage. I don't mean to make Mike out like he's super old, because he's not. He's not that much older than I am. He's like 15 years older than I am. At most, you know what I mean? He's not like 85, you know?
Yeah.
God, he's going to kill me.
He's not going to listen to this.
Oh, good. But so that dynamic, the way that dynamic just occurred organically was really pretty neat. And I don't know how you intentionally bottle that. That just sort of happened, you know?
Well, and I'm like thinking back on that period where it really was the majority of the time there was a set cast, if you will.
Yeah.
So it almost evolved. There was almost like a season arc where the jokes would run through multiple episodes, and
totally.
You know, and there
Matt's
are many
baby furniture.
times. Yes. Oh goodness, I still get that in emails, and I'll tell you what I just got in an email the other day was I really miss Ed Pirnik's random noise effects.
Oh God, I had so much fun doing that. And it's, you know what? And I knew it was totally lame, but it was so fun. It was just so silly. And that's another thing that was really fun is like how serious are you going to take yourself? It's a freaking woodworking podcast. Like, you know, and we would get, some people would get so annoyed. Like, I don't like all the snarky banter between Matt Kenny and the blah, 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 or you guys have too many inside jokes or, whatever. But that's it was barrels of fun. I still
have the folder, inside my STL folder. I have the folder of sound effects or whatever. And it is, it goes all the way back to the beginning of the show. There's the news alert sound effect.
Yeah. Breaking news. Awesome.
Let's see. What else was there? We should, acoustic loop, which was the theme song.
Yes.
Angels. There was applause because every show started with applause.
We did film in front of a live studio audience. Laverne and Shirley has been filmed before a live studio audience.
I'm trying to remember. I feel like this was used one time and was maybe with John White or something, but Ask a Rocket Scientist theme?
Yes. It was with, it was with one of our former shop managers, Bill Peck.
And Bill Peck was the rocket scientist.
Yes.
Okay.
Bill Peck was he was the guy for a few years. He was a retired gentleman who was very gifted with his hands and understood engineering and whatnot, and took care of the shop, make sure everything was maintained properly, everything was functioning properly. And he was a legit rocket scientist. I can't remember who he worked for, but he worked on, like, I'm not kidding, like ICBM projects and stuff. He worked on stuff that he could not speak with us about.
Okay.
No joke. And he was very technical, very gifted, and very precise. So he was a great guy for that job. And he was also a really sweet guy. I hope he's, wherever he is in the ether, I hope he's doing well.
I think they moved out west. Yeah.
Colorado, because he had kids in Colorado.
Yeah.
Anyhow, not that anybody listening to this cares about where Bill Peck moved to. But
so you're still producing video and things, right?
Yeah, I produce a lot of video products and audio and still photography. So I'm still a content producer.
You started off as a photographer, right?
Career-wise in general, yeah. So I started off in the journalism world as I was doing design, I was doing photography and editing, and I was always in international news. And the impetus to go to Taunton just came out of I was living in New York, and at the time, I was editing. So I had a stable of photographers, and we would send photographers all over the world. At the time, we were dealing with primarily, stories in like Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan. There was another intifada in Israel at that time. And it was it was really heavy stuff.
Yeah, that's heavier than Taunton. Yeah.
It was heavier than Taunton. And one day I was at work, and there was another one of these conflicts between the Israelis and the Palestinians had begun. And across, my desk came two photos. And it was a situation where, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, were, launching helicopter attacks in the Gaza Strip against militants, and the militants were firing homemade Qassam rockets into southern Israel. And so you had casualties on both sides. And I got a photo of the aftermath of a helicopter strike on a building in the Gaza Strip. And it was a pile of rubble. And in that rubble, you saw the remains of a 3-year-old girl. And then the opposite shot came after a missile hit a house in southern Israel in an area called Sederot. And it was this little boy, totally innocent of all this, just in sheer terror, crying because his house literally got hit by this rocket fire, and his whole world had collapsed around him. And I remember talking with my boss at the time. I don't remember how this conversation went down, but I was like, well, these are clearly the two images that we want to lead with when we sell our coverage of this event. And it was very cold and calculated, and it was like, oh, this is a great shot, and this is a great shot, and it tells a story here. This is what we should lead with, right? And and then I went home that night, and I was like, geez, it's a terrible lack of compassion. And so I literally that night I wrote a letter, an email to Kevin Ireton, who at the time was the publisher of Fine Homebuilding, and I literally it was just like stream of consciousness. I grew up doing this type of work, and and I'm a content producer, and I really want to make a change, blah, blah, blah. And he wrote right back, and he said, listen, I don't have anything for you at Fine Homebuilding, but I'm pretty sure there's some stuff open at Fine Woodworking. Let me put you in touch with Anatole Birkin. And that's how that whole thing began. So it was just like, I don't know, it was very cosmic. In a lot of ways,
yeah. It was right there when you needed it. And
yeah,
wow,
totally.
What a freaking crazy story, man. I'm sorry. That's
I'm full of those.
Yeah.
Full of those.
So, what was it like coming to the magazine at first?
My wife will tell you, she's reminded me of this, that I was a real stress case for like the first year because I had, imposter disease.
Mm-hmm.
They gave me this test, and part of the test was all this HTML stuff. And I didn't know anything about HTML. I was a writer and a photographer and an editor. Like, what the hell is this crap? So I was at a friend's house in New York. I've never admitted this either. I was at my friend's apartment, my friend Jeff. And I was like, Jeff, you got to help me with this part of the test. I don't know what any of this means. Like, it's a bunch of tags and like an open space and the close this and a slash. I don't know what the hell any of this means. So Jeff is like telling me how to fill all this stuff out. I was like, I'll learn it. Don't worry. And I did. I learned it.
Yeah.
But my buddy Jeff helped me get that job. But there was a year of a lot of stress. And once I think the change, and I think this is a good sort of learning point for a lot of, God, it sounds so lame, like young people. But there was a good learning point there in that the minute that I sort of relaxed and let my guard down and let my ego go and said, wait a minute, I know I have rudimentary woodworking skill, and I know how to take photographs, and I know how to write. I can do most of what is being asked of me. There are some technical things I need to learn, but like my passion's in the right place. If your passion is in the right place, by and large, you will figure it out.
Yeah.
And that was the big lesson. And I did. I figured it out because I really loved where I was. Still do love that place. I adore it. Now I pay for a subscription. It's so weird. By the way, what the hell, guys? Like, give me a hello. But
I'll
I
tell
still,
Betsy to get you a comp.
Yeah, tell Betsy, like, what the heck? Give me an online subscription, baby.
Yeah.
No, but in all seriousness, like if you're doing something where you're passion wise, the technical stuff it'll find its way to you.
Yeah, I remember looking at the job listing and talking about it with a buddy of mine who was a headhunter, but who was helping me.
Yeah,
and I remember thinking that how did this guy do all of this stuff? How did he know all of this stuff? And my buddy Steve said, "Well, nobody has all of these skills except that guy." And they're just trying to check as many boxes beforehand as they can. So again, to any young people, nobody has all of these things that a job requirement lists. But you just got to try and check as many boxes as you can. And it's funny now. It's like, I look, because this job, you're probably one of the only people who gets it. It's a weird set of skills that you acquire over time,
Yeah. And you'll always be told by people that occasionally get, perturbed and write, a strongly worded letter. They'll tell you that, this guy Ben or this guy Ed just doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Get rid of him. What the hell's wrong with this guy? And truth be told, sometimes I didn't, I remember all those people get really, really angry.
There are some people who do really take things very, very personally. And I remember, probably my second episode, I had the, I believe it was a Word doc that you left that was, web producer's diary or whatever. And it was the how-to of everything. And
this is where everything is and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And, for some reason, the RSS feed disconnected to iTunes. And I went through and did absolutely everything to the T to that thing. And that week, the episode was 3 days late, and you would not believe the emails that I got, and
well, that's good.
Yeah.
People,
it's people are passionate. But yeah, it was week 2, and it was just constantly like, oh, will you please call Ed back already? Would you please have him, and it was like, I swear to God, it's a server thing.
Well, we were doing, when I left, like the last few years of the podcast, when I was there, we were using a third party to, we'd upload the audio there, and then they would spread it out. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, but at the beginning I was handwriting code and stuff and sending, for the RSS feed, to get, the RSS feed, for those who don't know, it's like, it's how you get the pipeline into iTunes. And there was code that I would write, open bracket, close bracket, all that stuff, and that's how it started. And then interestingly, Asa appeared on the Adam Carolla podcast, Ace on the House, which is a home improvement podcast. And after he appeared on that podcast, I was like, I could learn something from these guys because they've got a really good machine going for their podcast. So I wrote their producer, this guy, Matt. I was like, Matt, how do you guys get your stuff out there? And he's the guy that turned me on to this third party that, they handle all the coding and all that nonsense for you. But that's how all that stuff just develops organically.
But this was very, very early in podcasting. You were, this is the tail end of web, whatever, 2 point, whatever, but podcasts were not something that, everyone did. Nowadays, every actor's got a podcast, and every, publisher's got a podcast or two. And, it's pretty forward thinking of you to throw it out there and jump through the hoops.
I just like pretending I was an announcer.
Guy Rizdal.
That's right. This is Shop Talk.
Well, so what have you? So you've been working in the shop still, right? You were known for humidors. Are you still making humidors?
No, I mean, you know what I found out with humidors? I sold a bunch of them. I was making them and selling them as a little side gig. And, but what I quickly realized was that you could never really charge what, the true value of something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much work that goes in, and people would look at a price tag and go, what are you, nuts? I'm like, well, you have no idea what's involved in this. But so then I was just kind of building. I wasn't making much money at all. I was just doing it for fun. And I did it for a few years. And then I stopped doing that. And so now, there are some photographs that I sent you, and so I'll go through them.
Yeah.
That's okay. So if you go through them, by numbers, right? The first one. So this is a little cherry side table. This was actually the last piece of furniture I built while at Fine Woodworking. There's two photos. There's a close up and a wide, and it was for a video on sanding. So I built this thing.
Oh yeah, that's a great video. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very simple piece, right? So it's just, some tapered legs, a dovetailed drawer, an underbeveled top. But it was, in a lot of ways, I'm really proud of it because it was the culmination of all the learning that I had done, producing videos and whatnot with people, because everything is tight on this table. Like the joinery is dead on. I really took a lot of time to figure out the matching of the boards for the top. The finish is glass smooth. The hand planing is perfect. And it was like, holy cow, everything on this, I struggled to find anything that I did poorly on it. So it's something that I really love. So it has a place of prominence in our home. And then, if you go on to the third photo and the rest of them. So this is still being built, but this is a cabinet. It's cherry. It's basically a dovetailed cherry cabinet. And then it has antique chestnut doors, and that chestnut was given to me by
John Tetreault.
John Tetreault, yeah,
I knew it.
Who is
everybody's
one of the
got
art directors.
some chestnut from Tetreault around somewhere. Yeah.
So that's where that came from, and I had been saving it for years. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, and finally I was like, I need to build this jewelry cabinet for my wife. So it's going to go in there because I wanted it to be something that meant a lot, because it was from John, and I have a soft spot for John. And it opens up. There's a pine back, and then I ended up using 1/2-inch copper pipe that I sanded really shiny and then lacquered. And my wife hangs all of her necklaces off of that.
The copper looks fantastic.
It stays that way because it's lacquered, so it's it never.
So you really what is just going over that with 220 or something, and
I started 220 and then 400 and then 600 and then 800.
Wow.
And then so all I got left to do are the drawers. The drawers are actually ready to be glued together. I just haven't put them in so that when people look at this photograph, it's just my wife putting bracelets in the drawer pockets. But those will have drawers eventually. And then the last two photographs are, when COVID happened, just like you were saying, all of the places where we work, our places of employment, didn't quite know what to do with us at first. We were still figuring out the machinery on how can we produce content and whatnot. So I had a little bit of free time that first month. So my wife and I decided we hated our dining room. So we repainted it. We put up custom wainscot. And then there were these two god awful corner built-ins that were they were federal in style and had all this scroll work, and it was just too much. And I noticed that the paint, I was like, the paint's peeling right here. I'm just going to get rid of that. And I started lifting it, and pretty soon it all started peeling because it was, the typical, the guy put latex over oil without priming. And so I'm like, well, I'm not stripping all this paint. I'm just going to rebuild the built-ins. So we kept the doors, these arched doors with divided glass lights. And we did sand those and repaint those. And, but so we're in the process of wrapping that up. I still have to get pulls for the doors. But, the last photo is basically what they sort of look like before they go in. It's just poplar and plywood, and it's pretty straightforward. But I find that stuff is a lot of fun too, because pocket screws are great, man.
Oh yeah.
I don't care what anybody says. They're a lot of fun for built-ins. So I'm still I'm super busy, and I'm trying to think of, there are other. There's this. So I always wanted a really good Fender I'm blocking the mic now. I always wanted a really top end American-made Fender Telecaster because I play guitar, but I did not want to spend $2,000 on one.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, I can make this. So I built one, and it sounds great. The lesson I learned was, historically Fender built their Telecasters and Stratocasters out of ash. So I went lumberyard, I got ash, I built it. I'm like, geez, this thing is heavy as hell. It's like 10 pounds, 2 ounces, which for a guitar is super heavy. You want to aim for like 6 or 7, maybe. So turns out swamp ash down south is considerably lighter than northern white ash.
Yeah.
So it's very heavy, but for me, like, it has a beautiful sustain. So, you hit a note and it plays beautifully, but I would never play that if I were playing live music. Like, it would kill you.
So did you not wind up spending $2,000 in lutherie tools and jigs? Okay.
I'll be honest with you. I'd say all in materials and tuning pegs and all that stuff, 550, 600.
Wow.
And then I'd say about $600. And then and it was all good stuff too, like locking, tuning pegs, really good pickups, all that stuff. And then I had some router bits to buy.
Okay.
I had, there were a couple tools that I borrowed from people that were into guitar work, but it was approachable. So it took a lot of time.
Yeah.
That was the big one, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Yeah.
And I ended up reconnecting with our, basically the head of our office at Taunton, the lead admin, which is Betsy, quite by chance, because, I built this guitar and I did the setup on it, which is, I'm not going to describe what that is, but there's something you have to do to every guitar when they're new and occasionally throughout their life. And I didn't do a great job. I did an okay job. So I had to find a luthier that could do a proper job. And a buddy of mine found this guy. He said, I'll bring my guitar to this guy up in Stratford. Give me your guitar. I'll send it up with it. And so I went to pick it up like 3 weeks later, and I see a Fine Woodworking bag in his kitchen. I'm like, you, hold on, let me get my Kai Rizdal voice. Do you listen to, do you read Fine Woodworking magazine or listen to the podcast? And he's like, oh, my wife works there. And it turned out to be Betsy Engel's husband, who is a luthier. And
my wife basically runs the joint, so
yeah. She kind of keeps everybody, all the boys and girls, behaving properly.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool.
Nothing works without Betsy.
Full circle.
That's awesome.
Full circle.
That's awesome. So dear Shop Talk Live listeners, even if Ed stuck around, you still would have gotten stuck with people talking about lutherie stuff, which is
totally.
I build ukuleles from time to time, and I get emails. Enough about the ukuleles.
And he's got baby instruments, everybody. Baby instruments.
I need to put the Matt theme in. Oh, all right. I'll do that later.
You're making my vein in my forehead pop out. I'm laughing so hard.
Well, Ed, thank you so much. I can hear my kid outside right now.
Yep.
So, but thank you. Thank you so much. It was just, we were, I think when episode 200 came around, it just came and went, and I didn't plan anything. And I jumped on Slack, and I said to Barry about a week ago, I said, oh God, 250's coming up. I feel like I should do something special. And he goes, yeah, that's heavy. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, Ed. and it just, it's nice to catch up, and it's nice to have you on, and you're the reason why this is all going. And anyone who's an avid listener, without Ed Pirnik, there is no Shop Talk Live. So thank you for everything.
It was the best job in the world, and we had an absolutely fabulous time producing it. And I'm truly really happy that it's still going, and I've been gone for like 6 years, and it's still going, and it's going quite well. So I'm really happy. So thank you. And I'll be back for 500.
Yes,
for sure.
Yes,
no doubt.
I'll probably be a guest on 500 as well, hopefully. Well, that does it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. That was a lot of fun. It was great having Ed on, and maybe we'll do it again sometime. If you have any questions for us here at Shop Talk, send them into shoptalk@taunton.com. If you're watching on YouTube, click that thumbs up button. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thanks for listening.